I think that I'm going to hiding somewhere by a gated star. Baby, they ain't never gonna find me. I'm a renegade. I could be the one who saved you from this hard place. We could be as one and we'll escape. We could run away, we don't gotta stay. I can feel it, it burns inside me. Take away the pain, we can go insane. I can feel it, it burns inside me. We could run away, we don't gotta stay. I can feel it, it burns inside me. Take away the pain, we can go insane. Trust me, I won't let you down. I won't let you down. Yeah, I won't let you down. I won't let you down. Oh, I won't let you down. We could have the world to ourselves, going to a place that's far, staring at the stars for hours, 'cause you're a renegade. I could be the one who saved you from this hard place. We could be as one and we'll escape. We could run away, we don't gotta stay. I can feel it, it burns inside me. Take away the pain, we can go insane. I can feel it, it burns inside me. We could run away, we don't gotta stay. I can feel it, it burns inside me. Take away the pain, we can go insane. Trust me, I won't let you down. I won't let you down. Yeah, I won't let you down. I won't let you down. Oh, I won't let you down. Some gates never get to open 'cause it's too late. I could be the one who saves you from this place. Baby, they ain't never gonna find me, find me, find me. We could run away, we don't gotta stay. I can feel it, it burns inside me. Take away the pain, we can go insane. I can feel it, it burns inside me. We could run away, we don't gotta stay. I can feel it, it burns inside me.
By a whole grade.
I've improved.
Improved.
By a whole grade.
By a whole grade.
By a whole grade.
My teacher isn't just Mr. Maddock. It's a whole teaching team made up of James, Mike and Marta.
My classroom's all about doing and applying. My days standing at the front of the classroom with a PowerPoint are long gone.
I master every concept by learning at my own pace.
I spend 100% of my class time interacting and supporting individual students.
I move on only when the moment is right for me, not the whole class.
I know what each and every student is mastering and struggling on at every moment.
I know exactly what I need to learn next, and I can go back and review material at any time.
I spend my teaching time supporting and inspiring, not planning, delivering and marking.
I can learn from anywhere at any time.
I can switch off when school closes, knowing they are learning from the best.
My teacher has my homework marked before I get to class.
I set every piece of homework at the start of the year.
I'm 2 weeks ahead of my expected progress.
I can track everyone's progress with a swipe of a finger.
I can track my own progress and set my own targets.
I now have time to focus on developing the skills of every learner in my classroom.
I know exactly what it means to explain, evaluate and analyse, and I'm not afraid of any exam.
My lessons are now far more about the skills and the application, not just the content itself.
I've completely remodeled what it means to be a teacher in my classroom.
Good afternoon, one and all. Thank you so much for joining us.
I have to say I've been really looking forward to this show. So yeah, it's good to be here. We've got a lot packed in for this afternoon. I think we're going to do some stuff which hopefully is going to be really useful for you guys on the level that we're looking at, like that movement analysis thing. We're going to do some planes. We're not going to do axes this afternoon. Bear in mind, you need to speak to your teacher about your exam board specific language around your axes. But we are going to be covering movement analysis, looking particularly at ball and socket and hinge joints, and we're going to be looking at planes this afternoon. So that's going to be really, really, really good. Okay, a couple of introductions first of all. My name is James Sims. I am the director of the EverLearner, but basically a teacher, you know. And with me in the studio controlling everything, so if anything goes wrong, we're definitely going to blame her. It is Marta Sotera. Say hello, Marta.
Hello, everyone.
So, we also have Mike Pryor, who is working from home today. He's in control of our social media and interaction. So we're going to be asking you a little bit about that in a moment. So maybe you can send in some pictures, some messages. You can interact with us a little bit. And Mike's going to be in charge of that, and he's going to be communicating with us. But he's working from home today because it's one of his days where he does that, and he lives a bit far away from us to be up here every day. So there you go. So Mike's there, and he will be the person doing that. A couple of points before we kind of crack straight on with this. Speaking to both the students and the teachers with this point, I cannot emphasize strongly enough that it's really important for you to support our work and keeping this free by subscribing to the YouTube channel. Please, please, please do that. It's important you do it. It costs you nothing. What it allows us to do is to build the YouTube channel into something which is more significant than it is now. It unlocks certain features. That's how YouTube works. And then we can basically keep this free long term. Okay, so hopefully that's going to be beneficial to everybody. So again, I repeat, whether you're a student or you're a teacher, probably students you'll do it when you're at home. Teachers, you may well do it right now. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and do hit switch notifications to on, please. And that helps us a great deal in terms of keeping free content available to people when they need it. Secondly, if you've spotted so far, but I actually have two microphones on me today. This one, which is on my shirt, and this one, big thing, which is in front of me. Be aware that I'm going to be switching between two different microphones at least within this session. So in a moment, you're going to see me do this and get rid of this one, and that's when I'm going to be switching to the mic on my chest, okay? And that's so it allows me to move around during the teaching episodes. What that means for you guys is you might need to adjust your volume levels because there's going to be slight differences between the two different microphones. We try to minimize it, but you know, at your end you might just want to simply adjust your volume to do that. Thirdly, you should have notes pages in front of you. So especially if you're on the live stream, I've got my notes here, look. If you're on the live stream, you should have these already. If you haven't and you want to rush and get them, they're in the description just below the stream itself. If you're watching this on demand afterwards, then of course you can pause here and you can get your notes from below, print them out and get yourself ready. But do take this session in combination with those notes. It will make a significant difference to you to do exactly that. And finally, and I've already kind of touched on it really, this session is recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel. So we urge you, both students and teachers, especially teachers, do support us by attending these sessions live. It makes a massive difference to us that you do that. So please do attend live wherever is possible. But of course, you can benefit from the best of both worlds by having the recording afterwards. You can embed it on your pages. You can put it on your Moodle or Firefly, whatever it is you've got. You can use it in lessons. You can have your students watch it while they're at home. Whatever. Use it as you see fit, and that's going to be available to you. And it's the same link that you're currently on. So it will simply translate into a kind of an on-demand, just a YouTube video link, basically. So, so be ready for that. Marta, have I forgotten anything before we get started?
Their chance to participate.
Yeah, I was confident you were going to say no. I hadn't forgotten anything there. But yes, Marta, you're absolutely right, of course. So a couple of things. Two things really. One is we're going to be offering you the opportunity to contact us via Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and we really want to see some students contacting us on Instagram because we're told that Grid or Frame, Instagram Grid, but we would like you to send us your pictures, let's say Twitter, let's say Facebook. We'd like you to send them to us, and we'd like them to be what you're doing in those little breaks between the revision sessions. So the little 2-3 minute breaks that we have between sessions, what is it that you do there? Do you get the cat on your lap? Do you eat some pizza? Do you make a cup of tea? Do you get together with your mates? What is it that you're doing on that? Share that with us. #revision break. I think Marta put it on the screen a few moments ago, and you can see that. Teachers, obviously, if you've got the students in the classroom with you, then it would be really great if you can perhaps stimulate that and send some in. Obviously, we understand you can't necessarily send photographs of students, and we don't encourage that. obviously things that are appropriate. So that would be great. Finally, we also have an opportunity for students to interact on the P quality level. So Marta, could you put that up for us? And I'll put your audio in case I miss something here, Marta. But Marta's just showing you here, if you go to the EverLearner.com and you click on News, behind that News tab, there is effectively a blog post, and it's called Interactive Questions. So Marta's going to take you in there, and you can see there's a batch of questions there for GCSE PE that you can go and have a look at. And what we'd like you to do is we'd literally like you to submit your answers to some of the exam questions that we're presenting, or the exam style questions, I should say, that we're presenting here. And what you guys can do is that you can submit to us what is hopefully a really high quality answer, and that allows us then to share that great answer more around the community, and it ups the kind of conversation quality around this whole session. So do go and have a look at that. Teachers, you might want to get your students submitting that in lessons to come over the coming days and weeks. That's absolutely fine. We're receiving those actively. We're kind of going to mark them, but not really. We're looking for great answers, and then we're going to share them. So two things. If you send us what we find probably the funniest photo, in truth, on the hashtag revision break, and if you submit a really great answer on the interactive questions, we're going to send you some prize out. Specifically, we're going to send you some roadmap information, more of which a bit later on in the session. So Marta, I think that finalizes everything. Is that fair?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, so we're going to switch to the canvas now. Get ready. We're going to do some movement analysis work. We're going to get started straight away. Be ready, please. Pens, pencils, everything at the ready. Let's see if we can get a really good session done here. Okay, let's get on with this. We're looking at some movement analysis. We really want to upskill you, I suppose, not just around the notion of movement analysis, but I'm going to touch a great deal here on the muscular system, and I'm going to touch a fair amount here also onto the skeletal system, and of course how those different systems interact, a theme which comes across really, really strongly in your GCSE. So we're looking at Laura here. Here's Laura. She's one of our athlete profiles. Laura, let's put her over here. They've undoubtedly chosen a bad colour to try and write on top of some people with different coloured jumpers, but never mind. Laura over here, and we're interested in her performance here, especially this particular image, because it allows us to actually address certain types of movement analysis from this single picture. And I'm going to keep referring back to this as we go. For you guys, I'd really encourage you to get down every word and every note I make here on the screen, and there will be additional things in my speech and how I describe this stuff as well. So there's my challenge to you. Can you concentrate on the live show and get as much done as possible? If you're watching it on review, on demand, can you pause and take the information in that you need to take? So, all that being said, in fact, one other thing I do want to say to you is I'm going to look at 4 joints right now. Okay, so 4 different areas of movement I'm going to look at, and those 4 joints I'm going to consider to be the major joints: the hip, the knee, the shoulder, and the elbow. Okay, I'm not going to. I know some of you guys on some of your exam boards you look at the trunk, and you also look at the ankle, because that isn't universal across the exam boards. I'm not going to touch it here, but these 4 are. Okay, so that's the thinking behind that. Right, all that blabbering on. Let's get on with it. So I want to focus on the hinge joints first of all. And they're kind of useful to have a look at in combination, because they basically work in the same way. So of course over here we have the elbow. That's fairly straightforward. And over here we have the knee. There's not going to be any prizes for naming these things, but there we go. So we've got these 2 hinge joints, the elbow and the knee. And really the point I'd like to get across to you is that these hinge joints, they move through one single plane. And we're going to come to planes later on in this particular session. But of course you can probably already tell me that this is through the sagittal plane. If you want to write sagittal down, it's got a single G and a double T. So these, again, I'll come back to planes later, but these hinge joints move through the sagittal plane and the sagittal plane also only. We could also say that of the ankle for those of you that study it, even though it does move slightly through the process of inversion, eversion, left and right. But anyway, let's not worry about that. So let's look at the elbow first of all. I want you guys to recognize that I have got this muscle here, well, we all have, on the front of the upper arm. I've made it look like some kind of hot dog sausage with some mustard on here. And of course this muscle we know is the bicep, and if you really want to be super posh you can call it the bicep brachii, and if you do use the brachii it's 2 eyes on the end. You don't necessarily need to use that word. Bicep is the key. It has an S on the end. And of course on the back of the arm, we have this muscle here, and this muscle is the tricep. And again, you can apply the same principles there. It's got an S on the end of tricep, and brachii again is its second word name. Okay, so you can use brachii if you want to. You don't have to at this level, but it's there if you want to use it. So these two muscles are both going to work to move the elbow, and then beyond that, what I want to do is I want to have a look at the different bones that are involved here. So this big bone up here I want to refer to as the humerus. So the humerus is the bone of the upper arm. Let me finish it off properly. And then here, if you look at this bone here is the radius. Okay, the radius. And that's on the thumb side. So if you look at your forearm, the radius is on your thumb side of your forearm. Okay, and now really interesting is this other little bone under here, another long bone. And this, of course, you probably could tell me, but this is your ulna. Now, you might not think the ulna is a very exciting bone. Two things I personally think are fascinating about the ulna. One useful, one for this level, another not so. The ulna and the radius actually have a joint all by themselves. That's just above the wrist, called the radial-ulnar joint. I'm not going to go on about it anymore because we don't study it at this particular level. But what I think is really interesting is at the point of this ulna over here is the insertion point of what muscle? The tricep. So the tricep, when it pulls, actually pulls this thing in that direction to straighten or to extend that elbow. Okay, so I think that's super important. And when you go a bit further with this, you're going to, in fact, some of you study lever classifications on your course. When you look at lever classifications, it's this very point of the ulna. It's actually got a name of the olecranon, if anyone's interested. But this point of the ulna makes this a very particular and specialized form of a lever system when we are extending the elbow. So, of course, we know that straightening the elbow is called extension, and that is powered by, as I just said, the tricep brachii. And we also know that if let me choose a better color than that. We also know that if we curl the elbow in that way, this is what we call flexion. Okay, so we want to get that nice and clear flexion in there. So flexion is bending at the elbow, extension is straightening at the elbow. So, and I should say as well, flexion is caused by a concentric contraction of the bicep, okay, which causes this pulling. It pulls here on the radius, look, and pulls the forearm upwards to bend, to decrease the joint angle. We call that flexion. And as I said before, that all happens in the sagittal plane. Let's move on to the knee. Very, very similar sort of situation. This time, let me do the bones first. I've got this big bone here. That, of course, is my femur, or your femur, we could call it that way. And we've got this big bone here. This is your tibia. Now, I'll come back to Laura's image in a second when we look at flexion extension. So femur and tibia. Now, I also want you to realise that the muscles which control the knee, they are above the knee. So I have this one here, okay, and I have this one here. Okay, and the one above the femur, this is what we refer to, I'm sure you guys know this already, this is what we refer to as your quadricep. Now, I'm going to simply leave it as your quadricep here. We're not going to write in the vastus muscles and the rectus femoris muscle because we don't need to touch that for right now. But I'm also going to talk to you about this muscle on the back of the thigh, back of the femur. And of course, this is your hamstring group. And we're going to write it in as hamstrings. Okay, and again, there's three muscles in there: semimembranosus, semitendinosus, biceps femoris. Let's leave that information for now, and let's simply refer to it as the hamstrings. Now, what I want you guys to know is that if my hamstrings contract, okay, look, they're connecting here. When they contract and shorten up in that direction, this moves around here, and this, of course, we call flexion. And when these quadriceps, big powerful muscles on the front of the thigh, when they contract upwards in that direction like that, of course they straighten the leg, and that is what we call extension. Okay, extension. So we again have got the notions of extension and flexion at the knee joint. Examples from Laura. Let's have a look. Well, look, we've got a classic here. Here is the arm in a flexed position. How has that been achieved? Well, this muscle, the bicep brachii in the front, has pulled on the radius and has created that movement like that. We could say the same here, couldn't we? And we see here we've got flexion as well. Okay, this time the flexion has been caused by the hamstring group on the back of the thigh, pulling on the lower leg, and of course here we've got extension of the back knee, and the extension has been achieved because the quadricep group has pulled and has straightened that leg in that way. So straightening, extension, bending, flexion, beautiful. Now let's make it a little bit more challenging. Let's look at the shoulder for a moment. Now we're going into, of course, what we would refer to as ball and socket joints. Ball and socket joints. Ball and socket joints. Now I'm not going to get into glenoids, fossa, acetabulums. That's for a later stage of study. But what I would say to you guys at this point with the GCSE PE courses, you're really in what I would call a gateway course. Some of you may never want to take that gateway to anywhere further in the study. That's obviously completely up to you, I understand. But if you do, there's a whole depth of learning that can be achieved here, and you should really consider it. Anyway, there's my little sales pitch. Now, I want to talk about the shoulder. I haven't got quite as much detail in my image to help us out here. In fact, let's just do the shoulder up with Laura here, okay? So we've got the shoulder here on Laura, and we've got that ball and socket joint in there, okay? And we could also talk about an equivalent one in the hip, or the other ball and socket joint over here. So the first thing I want to say about the shoulder, I'm going to write it up here, I think, rather than down by the image. I want to know the articulating bones. Well, this bone here in the upper arm, we already know, is the humerus. And the bone which it articulates with, and lots of people want to put clavicle at this point, but the answer is the scapula. And if we come down here, this scapula or shoulder blade, this is the, my scribble is appalling. This is the bone that actually articulates and provides the cup, the socket, for the head of the humerus, or what we call the humeral head, to actually connect together. Now, I personally think that the really interesting thing about this is that we've got a number of muscles which contribute. The ones I'm going to talk to you about is the muscles of the deltoid. The deltoid muscle really surrounds the shoulder. Okay, and the back of the deltoid is called the posterior, and the front of the deltoid is called the anterior deltoid. And the deltoid muscle controls both flexion and extension. Now, I want to be clear here. If the arm at the shoulder goes back behind the body, we've kind of got that here in this position, we call that extension. Okay, so if the shoulder is back behind the body, it's extension. If the arm's moved at the shoulder in front of the body, a bit like this front arm, we call that flexion. Again, in the sagittal plane once again, but of course it becomes slightly different, because in some movements we can of course take this humerus, and it's kind of in this line here at the moment, but we can move it to there, to there, to there, and to there, and of course we call that abduction. Okay, abduction. Okay, if we move that same bone back into here, into here, into here, and back into the midline like this, we call that adduction. Okay, adduction, back towards the midline of the body. Adduction would be this way, and abduction would be that way in this particular circumstance. Okay, so effectively like star jumping, as if you're kind of like doing a flapping action with your arm. Now, that's all well and good. Let's have a quick look at the hip. The hip works in basically the same way. It's a very, very similar joint. The kind of differences around the hip to the shoulder are that this socket here is much deeper. It's got some cool words around this. I'm not going to go into them now. But this socket here is much deeper, and effectively this ball here sits in that socket much deeper. So it makes it more of a stable ball and socket joint, but a ball and socket joint all the same. I do find it interesting, again, I'm not sure I'm just going to help us, but I do find it interesting to point out the shape of the top of the humerus to people. It's kind of like if you just look at that little bit that I've kind of like blackened the outline for there, that's a really unusual shape. You wouldn't necessarily expect that from a long bone, right? You kind of just expect them to be like a stick, a straight line, but it's a really unusual shape. So I'd encourage you to reflect on why that might be. I'm not going to cover that in too much detail right now. Now, what I do want to cover is to tell you that if I move my hip out that way, again, I am doing this. I have got a process of abduction. If I move it inwards, I have adduction. If And let's see if we've got an example up here. If I have my hip, or Laura has her hip, in front of the body like this, it's what we call flexion. Exactly the same as with the shoulder. And if the leg is behind the body like that, it's what we call extension. So now we've got a really nice understanding of all of those movements. Now, one other thing I'd just like to say to you, some of you need to know this, but bear in mind that if we look at the humerus here of the shoulder, this shoulder can also rotate. I didn't mean to choose that colour. Let me choose something different. Hang on a minute. What are my options? So this shoulder can also rotate in its around the axis of the bone itself, and we call that rotation. I'm just mentioning it to you. Some of you need to cover that, some of you don't, but it's called rotation. Okay, it's called rotation. So if you kind of put your arm out and then you rotate the arm, the humerus in the socket of the scapula, the shoulder blade, you can rotate your entire arm. That's what we mean by rotation. I might do it when I come back on the screen in a moment and show you what I mean. But that's what we call rotation. And we do it the same with the hip. It can rotate like this. So just be aware of that. It doesn't rotate all the way around, but it rotates a little. Okay, questions. Now, I've kind of prepped this because I didn't want to spend too much time showing you these, so you watch me write these in. So let me see if I can pop the first batch of answers in here. Look closely at this image and then complete the table that follows. So it's a movement analysis type exam question. So right shoulder, here it is, look. We're interested in this shoulder here. Right shoulder, what movement pattern is that? Well, the elbow seems to be in front of the body, like in a pointing forwards position. That's what we call flexion. Circle tick. We don't get a mark here because it looks like I've got to get both movement patterns. The joint type is a ball and socket. Circle tick, nice. The articulating bones, articulating means that the bones that meet at the joint. Scapular and humerus, correct. The plane of movement, more of which in the second half of this, but we already know it's the sagittal plane, correct? And which is the agonist? The agonist is the anterior deltoid. Anterior means the front, okay, the front part of the deltoid. If we were talking about the posterior, we would be talking about the back portion of the deltoid. Okay, you probably have got the mark for deltoid there, but I want it to be specific, so why shouldn't we be? Now then, let's go a little bit further. We've got the right knee now, so that's this knee here. Okay, so let's have a look at our answers. We've got here the right knee is in the movement pattern of extension. Now, I had to think about this one because there is a slight bend there. So if you're saying to me, James, that's flexion. Yeah, okay, you might be right. I felt it was more straight than bent. So for me, I went for extension. Now I've got my two marks, my two movement patterns correct, so I get a mark. I've been super harsh in this question because it's a tough question. You've got to get 10 lots of information for 5 marks. It's a bit tough, really. What type of joint is it? It's a hinge joint. Beautiful. The articulating bones, femur and tibia. Nice, that gets me the next one. The plane is the same, sagittal, more of which in a second mark. And which muscle causes extension of the knee? Well, it's the quadriceps. Circle tick, 1 mark. I get my max in there and I move on. Okay, question. I've already got my answer in, so let's go through the question. Look closely at this image. Identify the movement pattern of the hips and the plane through which this movement has occurred. Now again, I had to look at this image. I had to study this image for a long time to decide what movement pattern was happening here. When I first saw this, I thought that this leg was in flexion and I thought that this leg was in extension. And if I'd answered it that way, I feel I could justify that. But let's be honest, sometimes in an exam, we're going to get a question where the image is kind of, this image of Laura here, but kind of because there's 1 mark available and it's only asked for 1 movement pattern, and it really very easily could be abduction, moving the limbs away from the midline of the body. I went for abduction there because I wasn't completely sure, but I felt, if anything, it was abduction. Now then, we've also got the plane of movement. Now, we're going to find out more about this now, so I won't go into too much detail. But abduction and adduction happen in the frontal. Some of you call it the coronal plane. There's my max. I'm good on those 7 marks that are available on some, well, let's be honest, some quite easy questions, but it's a great place to get started. Okay, so we seem to be getting a little bit of buffering on our little holding screen there. So hopefully, us coming back on the camera, that's going to sort that out. We shall see. So yeah, not totally sure why that's that was happening there. So hopefully this us coming back on here clears that up. So look, there's part one for you. Okay, so we've looked at a little bit of movement analysis there. We're looking forward to receiving your revision break images. You can, of course, already go to the EverLearner and start completing your interactive questions. If you've got a device in front of you, you're very, very welcome to go and do that. We would definitely appreciate that. And we're looking forward to reading your answers as well. But before we go any further, I'm going to just open up to any questions that we have received. Marta, I'm in your hands.
Yes,
and by the way, someone's given me a delicious mug of tea here, so that's very nice tea.
Great. So the first question would be why you've mentioned in the video that the socket is deeper at the hip than at the shoulder. Why is that?
Okay, so in terms of the depth of the hip cavity, that I would say the main thing to think about there is that the hip, yes, it promotes mobility in the sense that the hip has to allow movement to happen, and of course walking, running, kicking, cycling, all of those things require flexion, extension, and various other movements at the hip. But perhaps most importantly, the hip has to be a highly stable joint. So a couple of things that make the hip more stable than the shoulder. The first one is the depth of the socket itself. The socket is much deeper and goes much further around the head of the femur. Okay, so that's the first thing. I'm not going to get into technical terms for this right now, but we'll do that later when we do A-levels or whatever. But that's the first thing. It's kind of further stuck in there, if you like. The other point, it's a nice little point to know, actually. Out of the top of the femur, it's the only joint, at least to my knowledge, that does this. There may be another one that I don't know. But there's actually a little ligament that comes out of the top of the femur and actually connects into the ball. So even if you were to pull it, it would resist. It's almost like back in the day when I was a kid, Action Man was a thing, and it's almost like that little elasticated bit, which if you try and pull the arms off, no, I obviously never did that, but if you tried to pull the arms off, you would get that resistance from that elastic, and it's effectively the same structure. So those would be that's what I would say there. So the key point for me, Marta, is that the depth of the cavity promotes stability at the hip. Of course, the trade-off is that the hip is less mobile than the shoulder, but you might want to ask yourself, how many times have you heard of a dislocated shoulder compared to a dislocated hip? Dislocated shoulder can happen because you land heavily on the ground in, say, rugby, or you land badly in trampolining, that kind of thing. It can happen that way. To dislocate a hip, you're talking about massive impacts needed for that, and without going into sort of a slightly morbid area, you're talking about things like car crashes would be needed to have that level of impact on the hip. Okay.
Great. And also
Oh, sorry, I had you turned down. Apologies, Marta.
I said thank you. Great. Also, the other thing you were mentioning while you were on the canvas was also the words anterior and posterior.
Well said.
Thank you. As someone who's not from the field of PE, could you explain to me what is understood by that?
Something tells me, Marta, that as a Catalan Spanish person, you might know what anterior and posterior mean. Is that fair?
I've got a rough idea.
You got a rough idea, okay. So I'm going to stand up for this. I'll try and keep my microphone with me. So look, this is the anterior side of my body, and this here is the posterior side of my body. So anything which is on the front of me, see if I can get my leg on the table. Hang on a sec. So this here is the front of my shin. So am I going to really pull my trouser leg up here? I'm going to do it. Come on. So here I've got a muscle running down my shin, which is my tibialis along the tibia, tibialis anterior, front of the tibia. Okay, so anterior means the frontal section. Posterior, you might be able to relate it to a sort of a posh word for bum, I suppose. Posterior is anything on the back section of our bodies. I've got to try and get my trouser leg back down now. And those are useful things to learn. Useful language to learn for all kinds of contexts for now and in the future. So if you can get hold of that and understand that, think about tibialis anterior. It can only mean one thing. It's a name of something which runs along the tibia on the anterior side. There's no other option for what that can mean. So it's a specific nomenclature. I didn't expect that word to come out. It's a specific designation or name for something that can only be that thing. So physiology often works in that way. We name it very specifically. It's just the problem is their words tend to get a little bit long and slightly confusing sometimes. But that's the world we live in, I suppose. Any others, guys?
shoulder is capable of flexion and extension.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how does that relate to circumduction?
Okay, so warning coming up.
Oh, is my phone off? Microphone.
Your microphone was off. We've had a night. Go ahead again, Marta. Sorry.
Thank you. I was
a nightmare.
saying that you were saying that the shoulder is capable of flexion and extension.
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to circumduction?
Okay, good question. Whoever asked that, that's a nice one. So, warning, I am one of the clammier examples of the human species, and there's a significant possibility here of armpit sweat patch. I'm not embarrassed. I've lived my whole life with it. Don't be embarrassed. Don't judge me. It's normal. So, first things first, back on the feet. So look, if I go in this direction first of all, so I'm facing there, okay, so I'm facing that way, in front of me is flexion. Let's get that clear. At my shoulder, not at my elbow. Okay, so it's flexion at my shoulder. Behind me, let me do it with my left arm, behind me, here, this is extension at the shoulder. Now, in order for me to make that into circumduction you can think about circling the arms, think about backstroke technique, think about, I don't know, spin bowling or any kind of overarm bowling action in cricket, for example. In order for us to do that, we have to combine flexion with what we would call, there they are, abduction to extension to adduction. So that's why we say that circumduction can at least be considered, I'd say poorly considered, to be a combination of flexion, extension, abduction and adduction. So that would be my answer to that. So for me, I often don't think of circumduction as a movement pattern. I think of it more as a combination of different movements. But that's just my personal opinion on that one. We are going to address rotation as well coming up, but I do want to mention something about rotation because we're going to talk about it in a second. Rotation is different to circumduction, or at least it should be if your exam board specification has got it right. Okay, so rotation is something that twists in its axis. Okay, like this. Okay, so it could be this, you see it my neck, what we'd call my atlas and axis. We have rotation. But equally, if I take my arm, this is rotation. Okay, I'm rotating my arm. This is not circumduction. Big sweat patch. This is rotation. I can also do it with my hip, but I can't really show you it here. But that's an example of rotation. And I'm actually rotating around the axis of my femur. I think there was a music video that had this on. What was it? I want to say Blink 182, but I may have made that up. It could be any band.
They might be too cool for that.
Well, I'm not. I'm not cool. I'm sweaty and old, so that I'm allowed to be corny. That would be my answer to that question.
Okay, brilliant.
All right, good. So fire away, Marta. What have we got? I'm going to turn my mic down.
We've got a little bit of student participation, people getting engaged and tweeting their pictures of what they do during revision.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got, let me show you, we've got Dominic Murray who sent this lovely pic of him and his mates having a little break during revision time. And
that's great. We would is there a colleague there over in the corner there? We would like to know what your name is. I can't really see you very clearly.
Boys.
Okay, so we need the name of the colleague who's over there in the corner, please.
Sure
Do please, so just so we say hello.
Yeah. And we've also got this tweet from Windsor Girls PE.
No, we
girls are doing.
Yeah, we do know a colleague at Windsor Girls. I'm assuming that somewhere in there is Ms. Reynolds somewhere in there. So I'm going to say, hey, Ms. Reynolds, how are you? It's great, and thank you for participating. It's hugely appreciated. So great, got some participation there again. So before we move on to kind of like the next bit, can I remind you, we really would like you to visit over to the EverLearner.com and have a look at those interactive questions. They're just on Google Forms. You can take them completely freely. Go and have a look at them and get filling them in. Basically, you can do it tonight. You can do it now, whenever you like. Okay. So, Marta, where are we? Okay, ready to go to next bit? Yeah. Okay, what I would say at this point, I'd expect this little teaching episode to be slightly shorter than the first one. Okay, just slightly short, not massively, a tiny little bit. So I'm ready when you are, Marta. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so let's make a start on this second part. So we're talking about planes, and it's one of those things where you have to see the word, it doesn't sort of shout out to you exactly what it means, right? So let's see if we can kind of simplify this. I've heard an awful lot of people suggesting this year that this is a really, really hard topic and people are really confused and stuck on it. So we thought it would be a nice one to include. I'm going to be honest, I don't think it's something to get stuck on. And honestly, I don't think it's really that challenging. So if you're feeling worried about it, I really don't think you need to be. So let's sort it out one way. Let's sort it out once and for all. So we've got three kind of mannequin dummy type figures here, and let's just number them 1, 2, 3. Okay, and obviously we're going to name them from this point forward. So before we get into what these words mean, just accept from me that this is what they're called. So this first one is called the sagittal plane. Can I emphasize the need for you to realize that that is a single G double T? Okay, so that's going to help you out, this sagittal plane, more of which in a second. We have this next one, number 2 here. You've got an option here. Check your exam board spec for this, but you can call it the frontal plane. Some exam boards call it the coronal plane. Okay, I will call it frontal now, but replace that word with coronal as required by your exam board. Okay, and finally, this is called over here the transverse plane. The transverse plane. Okay, so the transverse plane. And you might be thinking, okay, fine, there's some words, I can learn them. Now what the hell do I do with this? Well, we use planes for in my opinion, we use planes for one single purpose, and that is this nice simple purpose of describing movement. Okay, now of course at the moment we're kind of learning that flexion is different to extension, to adduction, to abduction. The funny thing about all these movements that we're learning with sort of one single word for each one is during really dynamic sporting actions, they kind of all blur and merge, and the line between them is very, very slim. So having a planar description allows us to give more detail into how we're describing movement and the combinations of movement. So just take it from me, this can be a very, very useful thing. So first of all, let's look at the sagittal plane. In many ways, it's the one you're going to use most because you do a lot of work around hinge joints and also ball and socket joints. So it's a really, really useful one. So this is how it works. We see here that the sagittal plane cuts the body into left and right. Okay, so we can note that. I don't know if we're going to get any marks for saying that somewhere, but okay, it separates the body left and right. Honestly, that's not the bit I'm interested in. Why I'm interested in it is because if this performer here takes this arm at the shoulder and moves it into a position of flexion, as it's there, for example, can you see from me that that has moved along, or as I like to call it, through the sagittal plane? Equally, if they take that same shoulder and they put it behind them there, you know, like reaching back as if you're sort of grabbing a baton in a relay, something like that. Can you see how that is moved through the sagittal plane in that direction? Hopefully you can see that. Equally, if this performer sort of raised their hip in front of them in flexion, and now their leg was kind of like that in front of them, can you see that all of those movements at the hip and the knee have all happened along that sagittal plane? So the crucial thing for me, and let me write it down here, the crucial thing for me is that the sagittal plane describes the movements of flexion and extension at both hinge and ball and socket joints. So that's the point I really want to get across to you now. Now, for those of you that do study the ankle, you can also address plantar flexion and dorsiflexion this way as well, but I'm not going to cover that now because the majority of the boards aren't looking at the ankle here. So flexion and extension can be described in that way. And again, let me be clear, if this arm flexes at the elbow here, so it moves from there to there, that is also through the sagittal plane. So let's just go back up to Laura a second. Where was she? Right at the top. So this here, this knee, this hip here at the hip has moved through that sagittal plane. This slight flexion here at the knee has moved through that sagittal plane, and we're able to describe the movement in that way. Okay, so that's what our sagittal plane effectively does for us. It allows us to describe flexion extension. Now, of course, if you grasp that concept, it's not difficult now to see what the frontal or the coronal plane does for us. Because, of course, if this person
abducts their shoulder in that sort of position, can you see immediately that what we've got here is movement through or along the frontal plane? So first of all, we've got the notion of abduction. Okay, it's movement along or through that frontal plane. Okay, and equally, if the arm is moved back down in the form of adduction, we would be doing the same thing. Okay, so start to think about sporting examples of movements where you could describe them in a planar sense. You might even want to start to think about movements that combine, skills and techniques which combine movement from different planes. Trust me, that is not a big leap to take if you understand the concept. It's very, very simple, and you just have to get this conceptually right. Now, the only other point I want to make here is, of course, that the hip can also kind of abduct to some degree, and it can adduct, to some degree. It can abduct, so it can go from here in that direction, and it can go from here back in that direction, adduction. Remember, with this one, we are talking about movement in relation to the midline of the body. If we're talking about abduction and adduction, movement to and from the midline of the body. So the frontal or the coronal plane is all about this abduction, adduction. Now, transverse is probably the most testing of these. I want to say testiest. Does that mean what I mean? Does that mean what I mean it to mean? To be testy means to be grumpy, doesn't it? Anyway, that's another story. So the transverse one, I often find when you look at this, it's not intuitively obvious what's going to happen here. But the point I would like to make for you is that if this performer, for example, was to turn their head, like if you could now just, I don't know, wherever you are sitting, I'm going to move away from the microphone briefly here, move your head as far to the left as you, I might have gone a bit quiet there, so twist your head as far as kind of to your left. That is movement along or through that transverse plane. Now, another example I'd like to give you, I mentioned it briefly earlier, if we take the axis of the arm for a second, if we are to rotate that arm in this way, that rotation also happens along or through the sagittal plane. Equally, if we take the axis of the leg and we were to rotate it this way, sort of turning our foot out and in, think about sort of different positions that, the positions 1 to 5 in ballet, for example. So that's going to also provide us that kind of movement along and through this transverse plane. So all that in conclusion, the point I'm trying to get to you is that the transverse plane describes rotation. Okay, it describes rotation. So we can now take a sporting movement and we can describe it through planar instruction. Okay, or through analysis of planes. And that's a really nice skill for you guys to have. Let's have a little look at how some questions might address it. So let me drag you down here. So what have we got here? Barry, I might just make this slightly bigger for you. See if I can do that now. I might regret doing this here. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. Okay, hey, that worked all right, didn't it? So a little bit bigger. So practice questions. All movement can be described by using planes. For the following examples, identify the movement pattern and the plane of movement at the specified joint. Well, okay, I've got the first ones in. I've already answered these for you. So left knee. So this is this knee here. Okay, for our performer up there. This is Sarah, by the way. We're going to look at Sarah's performances some other time. She's a really good quality netball player. So movement pattern, well, the leg is straight at the knee. So, of course, we're going to call that extension. An extension is going to get us a circle. It's going to get us a tick. It's going to get us a mark. Now, we know from what we just said a moment ago that, whoops, I'm regretting it now. I have to start dragging this around. We know that extension is as a result of this, it moves through the sagittal plane. So all flexion extension is through the sagittal plane. I might not do that anymore. I guess it's going to confuse me if nothing else. So we know that sagittal is the plane of movement for that movement of extension. Now we're going to get exactly the same here. This time we've got the neck. Okay, so we've got the neck here. Her head is rotated to look in that direction, something along those lines. So we can call that, boom, rotation. And what we're saying here, we mentioned before, rotation happens through or along the transverse plane. So again, nice, 2 marks there, 1, 2, boom. Right shoulder, so it's this one. Now this is probably the test. Why is it the trickiest? This, for me, the image doesn't give me every single possibility of information I could get to be 100% certain of what it's asking me, but I'm making an educated guess. So I'm assuming here that this shoulder here, I'm going to describe this as abduction. Now this is where the planar movement, at the point I made before about combining movements, is interesting, because abduction, of course, if your arm goes out in front of you first and then above your head, it's initially flexion, right, then hyperflexion, and then into sort of an abducted position. And of course we do have that concept, for those of you that study it, of circumduction, which you can use if it's on your specification. Okay, so circumduction is that combination of flexion, extension, abduction and adduction to kind of circle the shoulder or circle the hip. But I'm going for abduction. That was my educated intuition around that joint position, so I get myself a mark there. And of course, as we said before, that is along the frontal plane. Okay, so I now have that frontal or coronal plane circle, tick one mark, and I've got all 6 of those marks available, and I get my max. Beautiful. Now, although these last 3 questions are super simple, and we started at a really easy pace here with this one in sessions 2 through session 6, we're going to be discussing, evaluating, analysing. We're going to get there, okay? Just be patient. So we've got a command word here of identify, identify, identify. Let me be clear with the concept of identifying something in an exam. For goodness sake, if you are asked to identify via an exam question, do not spend any time doing anything else other than naming it. Okay, I'm going to say that again. If you're asked to identify something in an exam answer, all you have to do is name that thing. 0, nothing, absolutely zilch else, because the skill is identifying. I don't need to describe it. I don't need to explain how or why. I don't need to give it strengths and weaknesses. I don't need to compare it. None of that. I'm simply saying what it is. Now, of course, I'm being asked for 2 here, so I need to identify 2 movements. So I'm going to say what they are. So let me put the first one in for you. Super, super easy. I'm a bit disappointed with my answer, because of course I should put a full stop. Come on, James. So identify 2 movement patterns that take place through the frontal plane. Okay, now I've got abduction, adduction. Nice, there's my little max. Super simple. Identify, I'm going to do nothing but name these things. Often with identify questions, we normally say it is something. But here, of course, we're saying they are, because we're asking for 2. That's all. That's the skill. That's all I have to do. So here again, they are. So my 2 movement patterns are flexion and extension. Beautiful. There's my little max. Now this last one, I don't realistically think you GCSE guys are going to get 2 marks for naming rotation. So identify 2 movement patterns that take place through the transverse plane, okay? So I decided, I don't think in reality you're going to get a 2-mark question for this. You're just going to get a mark for saying it's rotation in reality. But I decided just to go a little bit further with it. And I said they are, same skill as before, medial and lateral rotation. Okay, so I've got my medial and my lateral rotation. So I get 2 marks. If you're not bothered about using the words medial and lateral rotation, I don't blame you. I probably wouldn't use them in a GCSE exam either, but I kind of made this question that way, so I had to put something in. But the key point is this rotation point, okay? This rotation point, okay? Rotation happens through or along that transverse plane, and as a result of that, we can describe movement in a much more coherent way as a result. Okay, I'm going to switch off from the canvas here and come back to speak to you on the camera. A few moments, please.
Woo! How are we? Okay, so that's that bit. I'm kind of proud there. I don't often do this, but on my little electronic pen, and you see how I zoomed. I pressed there's a little button on it, and until recently I never really knew what it did. And I've got my little button sorted out now, so that's nice. A nice bit of tech to have working a bit better. So
impressive.
So there's a bit of stuff on planes. I do find that's something that does confuse students, even teachers sometimes. So it's something that I think is useful to include. So anyway, I want to open up to questions. So Marta, fire away.
Yeah, I've got a question which would be, what is the difference between a plane and an axis? I personally get a little bit confused.
Oh, is this from you?
It's from me.
Okay.
I get confused.
Okay,
So tell me.
So
I'm sure I'm not the only one.
So there's actually a number of differences. The ones that I think are most pertinent in this situation are that you should think of a plane as like a screen. Almost like it carries on in all directions, but it is a flat surface that crosses through something. So obviously in this case, the sagittal plane crosses across my body and keeps going in that direction. Sorry. The frontal, here's me confused. The frontal plane does that. Apologies, folks. The sagittal plane does the same, but in this direction. When we think about an axis is like my pen. It is a solid, rigid bar. Okay, so imagine a pen that was big enough to penetrate through the top of my head. Penetrate through the top of my head. Come all the way down through the center of my body and come out. Well, you know where it's going to come out there. It comes out underneath you. That would be a good description of what we tend to refer to, depending on your exam board, as the vertical or the longitudinal axis. And in this case, if we rotate the axis, then the person will twist. The one that goes in the side through the hip. If we rotate, so imagine it goes in all the way through there, just a solid bar. If we rotate that bar, the person will twist. Okay, in that case, almost like a front somersault, or it could be we go in that direction and the knees come up, for example, into sort of like a tuck or a back somersault type position. Then we have the other one that goes through the belly button, which really should be called the frontal or the anterior posterior axis, but somehow some of the exam boards have managed to get that wrong. So this is why we're not teaching it on this stream, at least. With that one, of course, if you have the solid bar going in and you rotate it, you do like a cartwheel or you do like a diving save off to the side. So I would say one is like a screen and the other is like a rigid bar. That's the important thing to realise. The other thing I'd say is that in my mind, axes are a biomechanical principle, whereas planes help us in physiology to describe a movement. So in my mind, they're also different in that sense as well. But I can't emphasize enough, we're not going to touch axes really in this stream because we have got students with us for EdXL, AQA, OCR, WJC, EDUCAS, IGCSE, and the only thing that's consistent between them is the planes. It's criminal what some of the exam boards have done with axes. I mean, they literally have me on our exam board specific videos on the EverLearner.com. They literally have me saying black is white. What can I do? It's difficult. One of the videos recently, I took a moment to pause before I taught something, and I said I'm going to pause for a moment to mourn the death of the truth before I told the students in the video that I think it was that this one here, this axis on the side, was called the frontal axis. Unbelievable. Anyway, that's my little whinge over.
Brilliant, thank you. And there is a question, which in this case is not mine, it comes through Twitter, from someone asking, how can you identify AO1, 2 and 3 questions? Okay,
so I'm not going to go into that here, so forgive me. What I would say is if you flick through your notes pack, you're going to see clearly that our questions graduate in difficulty and range and challenge through from session 1 through to session 6. The reason I can't address AO1ness, AO2ness and AO3ness in here is because it's different for all you guys who are on the receiving end of this. If you want that level of specificity, which you should of course, especially preparing for an exam, you have to go to the EverLearner.com and learn from there. It covers that in absolute full technicolor detail that's relevant specifically to your exam. We spent about the last 6 months doing exactly that. So I'm going to have to pass on that question to an extent, but do look through your notes and realise that we're going to cover much more AO2, AO3ness in future sessions. This was really knocking about AO1 for most exam boards today because we looked at some very simple opening questions. Okay? Yep. Any others?
Brilliant. Not from this end, no.
Okay, so give me a time check, please, Marta. What have we got?
We've got about 5 minutes.
Okay, so
we've got lots of Twitter interaction.
Fire away.
So we've got lots of photos
Mm-hmm.
that students and teachers have been sending.
Hey, that's a handsome chap.
This one from Flynn Duggan. Who's asking if you could possibly shout out Jake Browning as it's his birthday.
I would be delighted. So Jake, happy birthday from the entirety of the PE community. I'm assuming it's your 16th birthday. It's a big one, Jake. Have a really good time for the rest of the day, and I hope someone's spoiling you and treating you for the rest of the day today. Happy birthday, young man.
fantastic. We've also got this fantastic picture sent from Cannon Slade PE.
Mm-hmm.
Some absolutely, people trying really hard to be in the picture. Some people trying really hard to catch a little bit of
Well,
sleep.
first of all, I like the environment of the classroom. I like the things on the back of the wall. I've seen those in a few places before. Is that gentleman doing some kind of showing off at the back as well, which is good to see. Young person nodding off in the front. I'm trying very hard not to be offended, but I think I'm going to get over it. But thank you very much for the photo. Can I say that really is appreciated? And we have another one.
We've got Elizabeth College Sport.
Is that in Guernsey, right?
Students, yes, in Guernsey. Really students who look very committed.
And I believe that must be Mr. Eisenhuth's group, I think, or one of Mr. Eisenhuth's colleagues.
From Bishop Luffer.
Oh no, Bishop Luffer. I owe you guys a really big thank you because, especially to Mr. Brown. I don't think that's Mr. Brown in the photo there. I don't think, but you guys have been really helping out with a project that we've got recently and over a period of time. So super appreciated, you guys. Thank you, and we appreciate your patience with us as well. So great to have those on there. Oh yeah, competition winner. Well, I'm not going to choose it, Marta. I think the pressure comes on to you to decide. So who are you going for?
Well, I would say I'm a bit of a softie, as you know, James. So I think Jake Browning. It's his birthday.
Bit of a present.
I think he deserves this little student pack.
Okay, am I on the screen at the moment, Marta? Or?
You are.
I am. So Jake, we're going to send you a student pack with some of these resources on there for the roadmap. The roadmap is a tool. I talked a little bit about it today when I talked about the concept of identifying, for example. We're going to send a pack off to you and it will help you in your exam answer writing. I know it's super exciting and it's probably going to have to, Jake, you're probably going to have to it's a big poster that comes with it. You're probably going to have to cover up your Justin Bieber poster on your wall in your bedroom, something like that. I'm sorry about that, but it's temporary. And yeah, we'll send that out to you. If you could, Jake, if you could get in touch with us, so you can provide us your mailing address. If you could contact socialmedia@theeverlearner.com, socialmedia@theeverlearner.com, and we'll get that sent off to you. Just one thing, Jake, be aware that when we reply to you, we have to copy in some adults when we communicate with you. So it's not going to be a private conversation. It's going to be we may share it with your teacher or one of my colleagues here. Okay. All right, lovely. So we're gonna sign off there. We're gonna push a little bit of entertainment to you before we finish off. Those of you that are students in the room, if you're studying Spanish, we are on live tomorrow. Marta, what time are we on tomorrow for GCSE Spanish? 4? Are we on 1 or 4? Hang on.
No, I think it's 6.
Oh, you're on at 6.
I think I'm not sure.
Hang on.
Maybe it's 4.
Yeah, so GCSE Spanish at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Yeah. Have a look on the YouTube channel. We've got A-Level PE 6 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, early evening. And so 2 sessions tomorrow. And then we're back on GCSE PE on Monday when we're looking at effect of exercise, 4 o'clock on Monday afternoon. And again, the show will be on the YouTube channel. Thank you. Subscribe. It's really important. It's all we ask of you. Subscribe. Please do it. From James, from Marta, from Mike down in Chichester on the social feed. Massive thanks for being here. Have a magnificent evening. I'm off to do my coaching on my football team's playing tonight. Looking forward to that. Cheers.
The traditional classroom environment doesn't suit everyone. Students that don't fit this pace of learning begin to lose confidence. The problem is, the current learning model has holes in it. Luckily, the EverLearner.com is here to fill those holes. With the EverLearner Classroom, each student is given a chance to master each subject at their own pace. With thousands of video tutorials and tens of thousands of automated questions on the site, students can progress at their own individual pace. And because every interaction is tracked within the site, teachers can review students' progress and gain access to razor-sharp data. Teachers will have more time to engage with small groups and be better informed of where their time and support is needed. With the EverLearner, teachers can leave the traditional model behind and become facilitators, coaches, and inspirers. There's a reason we have over 100,000 registered students. To learn more, visit our website today.
But you tear me to pieces, so where does it come from? The scene that keeps playing on repeat ignores the rule of thumb. Oh, where does it come from? Oh, where does it come from? All your emotions with your heart on your your sleeve, it won't fade until you paint it black. I let it burn, you call the fire brigade, but I feel that it will come back. Oh, where does it come from? Oh, where does it come from? Oh, where does it come from? Oh, where does it come Just look at the state we're in. I breathe you in and I can tell where I end and you begin. Where I end and